Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is James Manley, Tales of the American Running Podcast, and eventually novel. I gotta check with my boss, my partner, see what the schedule is with that. I'm sure I'm running behind, no doubt. But, as y'all saw, last episode I did, or attempted to do rather, didn't really work out so well. I broke some of my own rules. I didn't follow my own habits that make me where I was, able to do and be everything that day. I was having a bad day. Anyone who struggles with mental health or anything else, it happens. Even the best of us who are good at following all the little rules we have to set to keep ourselves from ended up back in a hospital or jail or something else, so we can be of service and be with our families and actually be happy and, I wouldn't say sane, because I view a lot of things a little bit, not like maybe some of the average cats do, but I know I'm not alone. But anyone who has mental health issues, they understand how it can go sometimes. Took me a bit of help and time and support to get my head back right. But it all worked out, and I have no new addition to my criminal record or medical record, so success. And sometimes that's the best we can hope for in that day, And those of us who've had bad days like that, they understand what I mean. If you don't, I'm glad you don't. It's a hard lesson to learn, and not all of us can survive it. You can come out the other side with any part of decent peace. But God willing, or whatever your higher power may be, you'll make it through. But now on to what I was wanting to talk about in this. And it's something I've noticed and it's not just a generational thing. It's a society thing. There was a turn of phrase I read in an Anne Rice novel. I think I was 12 or 13 at the time. But the turn of phrase was, it was one of the main characters of the book, the interview of the vampire, Lily. Beginning of the book, someone pulled a gun on him and aimed it at him, and he told him, "You lack the courage of your convictions." That turn of phrase, "courage of your convictions," it kind of stood out for me, because not everyone really gets what that quite means. That conviction, that word has such a negative connotation, at least from where I grew up and everything. Convict or having a conviction was not a positive thing. But as I grew and aged and learned, being convicted of something is not always a bad thing. Being convicted means you have no doubt. And anyone who speaks with you or has an exchange with you can tell that in how you speak. Be it the grandmother who talks about spirits and ghosts, just like you talk about your neighbor's new car. She is convicted those things are real. And she believes and knows it. That's a conviction. I'm sure some of us would see it every day and you just think, Granny's crazy or da-da-da-da-da-da. If you walk anywhere similar of a path that I walked, you know, maybe Granny ain't crazy. You know, eventually through life, if you pay attention, even the most oblivious person has spiritual opportunities for spiritual awakening. To see the miracles of the universe and everything that's been made and created and perceived. But there's also other things. If you're a Christian, for instance, do you talk the talk or do you walk it? You know? Do you walk and carry yourself in everyday life, be it at home in your pajamas or at church or at the store? Are you the same person everywhere? You know, the same being. Are you convicted of the same values you had? Do you have values? Or are you just trying to make it from day to day? I spent at least a couple decades like that. Didn't know any other way of life. But it's always been kind of a beef that I've had with individuals or people in general is, if you really believe something, do you believe it with your whole heart? Do you carry it with you in everything you do? Do you hold doors open for people? Do you try to help? Is that something you value? You know? When you decide something, not saying that you can't change your mind with new information. I pretty much believe you're a fool if you don't do that. You know, you have to be open. Because a lot of times, most of the time in my life, I am the problem in some way. Either I was closed-minded on something, be it something I didn't know I was closed-minded on or not. We learn those things. We're closed-minded about a lot more stuff than we really think about, even though we claim to be open-minded. You know? Like one thing, and take it for what it is, I don't do snakes. I'm closed-minded about that. Right now, I'm okay with that. You know? I don't care if it's a garter snake or a freaking python or what it is. It ain't got legs, cruise around on the ground like it ain't shit, can kill me. You know? That just, yeah, call it genetic memory. Okay? I don't do snakes. Any other creature, as long as there's a chance it won't bite me, I'll probably try to pet the thing. But there's other things. Like, and this is going to be a touchy subject. So, of course, I'm going to charge at it. Trans LGBTQ issues. My son's trans. I'm good with that. But where my stance is where my courage and convictions lie is being able to separate tolerance from, I don't want to say acceptance, because that's not the right term I'm looking for. But there's a line in behaviors, be it whatever you were born at. If you want to function in society and be of service to a society, then you have to draw lines. right and wrong. Yes, you can tolerate some wrong as long as you have a definite limit to that. You know, and you don't have to buy into any of the science or pseudoscience or whatever about the thousand other genders or any of that other mess. But you do have to understand, you know, because I know in my life I've lived wrong for a long, long time without any condition of, like, even an idea of what right was. You know, I just wanted to hit the next checkpoint. You know, get my kid through school, get my kid through the day, get my kid through to school. You know, do the other freaking stupid, irresponsible shit that I did during Alex's raising. God forgive me. You know, but I learned you can fix an issue from inside the system. You don't always have to. I was always a rebel, you know, whether I meant to be or not. I thought I was, anyway. Pretty much if the crowd was doing something, I made sure I didn't do that. You know, or I tried to. Just because I didn't want to be like anyone around me. You know? I just had such a negative overall view of society and the world because of those that were closest to me. You know? And a lot of the people, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that my view, it's been proven. People's told me so many other things that I just couldn't believe about myself in my youth. You know? Because the way we look at ourselves, well, it changes. I've been blessed long enough to be able to get a clearer view. But that's because I do check with people. I know my perception can be off. Which is one of the reasons why I rely on my convictions. That way I don't have to worry about who I talk to, who I did something around, or any bad things that I might did or any good things that I might did. I couldn't see any of it because I couldn't see a clear picture. It's almost a form of dysmorphia for your personality. But if you're lucky enough to have people in your life that you can open up to and be honest with, and care enough about you to tell you the truth, the hard truth, then you can check yourself. And kids today, a lot of them talk about, we need to be tolerant and things like that, but then they seem to lack the courage of their conviction to be tolerant of the things that they hate the most, which is a challenge, speaking from experience. But I was lucky enough and blessed enough to live long enough and be put in a place to where I could learn other ways to be. I can be tolerant of Huh? I can be tolerant of so much stuff, such as uh, killings, murders. You know, I can be tolerant with that. If for no other reason than I know my instincts on that and my reactions will not fit into society. At least not a society that will allow me to still be of service to my kid or my kids now, since I do count my son-in-law as my child. So I have to be tolerant. You know, I've been blessed enough to survive several suicide attempts, several God casualties from alcohol and drug abuse, not to mention just tragic things of my lifestyle. You know, I should have been dead decades ago. God had other ideas. So, as long as I'm here until God decides I'm done, I'm at the very least going to be of service to my kids. And that's just something I'm convicted about. Just as convicted as I am that the sun will rise in the morning and it will set here in a couple hours. And most priorities of my life revolve around that. I was convicted. God convicts me on a regular basis. You know, but God definitely set up the cornerstones when I've had a couple successful attempts of suicide. And I know this won't let me be monetized because of that word, but I ain't worried about that now yet anyway, so I'm going to take advantage. But, because there's nothing, you know, you find a new rock bottom whenever you somehow find whatever it is that lets you or makes you fall through. And you're successful. And you wake up. You know, you kind of don't have a lot of other choices but believe in something. Something wouldn't let you go. You weren't done yet, whether you like it or not. And it proved to me that, you know, no matter how arrogant I get thinking I'm doing something, every action I do is because the Lord allowed it, or the Lord put me there for it. Good or bad. Because either I win or I learn something. You know? But people don't know how to stand on their convictions sometimes. You know? I believe that might be part of the problem. And with the way society is about so much mouth work and the minority of people putting more of the work into it without the mouth part. You know? Are you one of those people who show by the way you do things, by how you apply these convictions? It's been pointed out to me in the past by a few others that I'm similar to my namesake from the Bible. You know, I'm big on how you use stuff. I might not be able to explain what the idea or the scripture behind speak to one another, but I damn sure know how to apply stuff. I know how to use the tools I hear about. Usually it's by bumping my head and slamming my thumbs and all that other fun stuff before I get there. But I learn. And if you can apply these things, a lot of times, and more often than not, your actions speak volumes more than any word ever says. Although words are needed. You know? I mean, to this day, my kids still think I'm still a little bit of the old asshole that I was. And I'm sure I am. You know, I'm very plain spoken. You know, in everyday life. But tact, I've learned a little bit more of that. And a little bit more how to be sensitive to others. You know, choosing my words a little bit differently. Which is one of the reasons why I sometimes speak a little bit slow. I'm thinking and trying to articulate exactly what I want to express. It's far easier for me just to go, watch this, and do something. You know? Which is really weird for someone who's supposedly a writer. I should be a lot better with my words. I feel. You know, y'all tell me in the comments if, you know, maybe I'm off on that. Wouldn't be the first time. But these convictions, and having the courage of them, is there a hill that you're willing to stand on? Can you show that in everyday life? Even by where you set your boundaries at. You know? Are you tolerant of people who doesn't know how to use words? You know? Someone who, well, maybe if you don't like cussing, someone who speaks, someone who cusses every other word. I'm not always the best at that. I try to be better. I hope that maybe it shows in some of these videos as it goes. I'm definitely working on it, and it would be forever a work in progress. But I'm also convicted of that. So I try to show it by never stopping to do some sort of work on myself. Or something to improve in some way. That was one of my big issues with Dorothy, my biological mother. And something I could never grasp about her. You know, among the billion other issues I had with the woman. You know, she seemed to work against herself. You know, she'd leave a good job with 401k and everything else to a hourly, fly-by-night, might have vacation time job. For what seemed to be the only reason was didn't want to drive to another town. And in Texas, you know, everything is 30 minutes away from each other. You know, especially some of us out in places like Kermit or No Trees or Wolf City or Celeste. You know, I'm sure there's other places around the country just like that. Our friend in Idaho, who I was speaking to, you know, there's places like that everywhere. So, you get it. But that also carries around, and it don't matter whether you're thug, whether you're street, whether you're stereotypical 70, 50-year-old white dude, you know, the ones that everybody makes fun of in the horror movies, including myself. I'm not that kind of white guy. That's for damn sure. You know. But anyway, you know, we always people can see what you stand for, and what you believe, and who you are by the way you act. You know, if you see someone, you know, struggling to carry a bag of groceries, doesn't matter who the hell it is. Do you try and help them, or do you even notice them? Is that a conviction you have to help, or even for some of y'all that are still struggling and heading down dark paths? You know, do you carry yourself in such a way that people know that you're going to profit by whatever means? Who the fuck are you? And can you go to sleep, talk to the man upstairs, or whatever higher power you have, and be okay with it that day? You know? And people see you. Even they see you as the guy walking down the street every other day. You notice things like that. It sticks in your head. Even if they don't ever speak to you, or you don't ever speak to them, you have an idea of who that person might be in your head. You know? Can they tell that you don't play with things, or that you're a happy person? And what other people think about us, as much as we say that it shouldn't matter, it does. It's kind of the raw law of society. You know? You want to be viewed as, well, you might. You don't want to be looked upon. You don't want to be looked down on. You want to be of service. Or you want to be the cat that no one fucked with. You know? But do you have the courage other than your mouth to fulfill that? What it requires to do that, to be that person? To show those convictions? You're a patriot. You love the country. How do you show that? How do you show the courage of your convictions in everyday life? You know? You have a flag in your yard that you raise and lower every day? Something I learned many years ago. You know, anybody can say and talk the noise, well, if that had been me, I'd have been da-da-da-da. Usually my first response when I hear that come from someone, especially if I'm impulsive that day, is, motherfucker, you ain't got a clue what you'd do. Because, there's one simple reason. You don't until you've been there. You know? Some people have been there. And they understand that. Those of us in military, served in combat jobs during wartime, or not. Certain thugs, they're outside. Certain thugs, they're inside. They know what they do in certain situations because they've been in those situations. And that was one of my, it was an honorable goal when I was younger. Maybe not so smart, but I wanted to know that stuff about myself. You know, I think I've mentioned before that the only real role model I had was Batman. And part of that was putting myself in situations to where I'd know how I'd react. I got many scars from it, many injuries I still deal with, especially since I survived this long. But I can say things like, well, if that was me, I'd have probably did that. You know, even if it been, I'd have probably died. You know, but that's just how real I am. And I try to be. But you have that kind of courage of your conviction. It's not always about the extreme stuff. You know, if you pull a gun, you better be ready to use it. Yeah, no shit. You know, I taught the kids that lesson when I took it away from them. Yeah, I taught that to my old man a couple of times before he died. It's about the everyday things, too. Are you really a caring person? Are you really willing to listen to the dude on the bus stop that's having a bad day and just needs to just vent, needs to let it out to somebody? Because sometimes all we need to be is heard. You know? Or are you so wrapped up in your own bullshit, or it's not all bullshit, but in your own stuff, that you can't see past yourself? Is that a conviction you have? You show that. And that is one of the priorities, or at least for me it is. You know, and I think the world would probably be a lot better if more people in every generation would have the courage of their convictions, instead of just saying what's popular, or what's put in front of them, or what's socially accepted in whatever clique they're in. You know? Are you willing to put action behind the words you say? It's just something you gotta ask yourself, or at least, you know, I ask myself at least every few days. But that's what I need to do to help keep me where I can be of use and of service to anyone, including myself sometimes. You know? But hopefully someone got something out of this and maybe learned something, and if nothing else, maybe you laughed a little bit. I'm still learning. This is still a new process. I'm trying, me and Oakland Mike, my partner, over at Branded by Money, we're trying some new techniques and some new stuff with the podcast and stuff. I'm on track with the novel. Hopefully y'all be interested enough to go check it out. You know, I think that's part of the point behind these things that Mike was having, or the reason Mike was having me do some of this for promotion. You know, telling some of my stories, some of the things I've learned. some of the ways I've learned. Show what's going to be in the book, because I write very much in the way that I speak. And not necessarily how I speak on here, but how I speak to my kid, or how I speak to my brother, or how I speak to church. But then again, maybe Walmart would have been a better example for me. Especially with the way that I speak. Sometimes. But I hope everyone enjoyed this, and please like, subscribe, share. I'm still trying to get to the point to where we can make some money off of this, and maybe I can buy me a new mic or something for better sound quality.